Hello everyone, and welcome back to Isaiah for Latter-day Saints. Today we're going to be doing Isaiah 58. This is a well-known chapter, I think, to a lot of us. We know it because of what it says about fasting, and that's a lot of what it's about, but it has a lot of interesting details in it, and a lot of really sound advice for the past, but also for today. It's interesting. We have some interesting connections here, maybe with Islam, actually, in some ways we may not have expected. So we'll talk about some of that here. And Isaiah, whoever this is bringing up some interesting ideas about intent. What do you really intend to do when you do some of these things? And I don't know if I don't know how connected this is to the previous chapter. It seems like he's starting sort of a new thought here with 58. So we're just going to start at the beginning here. He says, "Cry aloud and spare not. Lift up thy voice like a trumpet. Lift up thy voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgression, and the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily, and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness, and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask me of the ordinances of justice, they take delight in approaching to God. Wherefore have we fasted, say they, and thou seest not? Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and thou takest no knowledge? Behold, in the day of your fast ye find pleasure, and exact all your labors. Behold, ye fast for strife and debate, and to smite with the fist of wickedness. You shall not fast as ye do this day, to make your voice to be heard on high. Is it such a fast that I have chosen, a day for man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush, and spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast, and an acceptable day to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh?" So this is he's really laying into these guys here. But he's saying, what you have been doing, if you're just going to do this stuff for the sake of doing it, and you're going to do it in some kind of a perfunctory and not a sincere way, that's really not going to help you. He says, "Cry aloud, spare not." So cry loudly, and don't hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Lift up your voice loud, to show my people their transgression, and the house of Jacob their sins. This is him saying what God has told him to do. Saying, tell everyone about their sins. He says, "Yet they seek me daily." Or, even though they seek me daily, and delight to know my ways, as a nation did righteousness. Or maybe even as though they're seeking me every day, and delighting to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness, and forsook not the ordinances of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice, and take delight in approaching to God. And I think he's saying it's as though, even though they're seeking me every day, they're pretending to delight to know my ways, but really, it's just perfunctory. They act like, yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness. They act like they're doing everything just right, but they're not. They're acting like they didn't forsake the ordinances of the Lord. They didn't forsake the laws of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice, and take delight in approaching to God. They ask for righteous laws, or just laws from me, and like they take delight in approaching God. They're acting like they're doing everything right, but they're not. Now this is exactly what we're going to get in Zechariah and Malachi later. These guys saying, you guys are playing the part really well, but you're not actually doing things the way you're supposed to. We also got this way back in the early part of Isaiah. This is a perennial problem. It says, "Wherefore have we fasted, say they." By the way, ordinance. We should talk about that. When we talk about ordinances, we mean something a little bit different than it means usually here. When they talk about the word ordinance, should probably just be translated as laws, something like that. So it can get a little bit confusing, because we see ordinance in the King James, and we think that it's ordinances as we know them today in the church. That's not generally true. Ordinances here is usually laws. They're talking about ordinances, but it doesn't call them ordinances. It calls them various different things. But here when it says ordinances, and you think, oh, here we go, we got it pinned down, this is ordinances. Actually, this is laws, so it's a little bit confusing. So, wherefore have we fasted, say they, and thou seest not? Why have we fasted, and you haven't seen it? Why have we afflicted our soul, and you haven't taken knowledge of it? Bold in the day of your fast you find pleasure and exact all your labors. So they're asking, we fast and it doesn't seem like anything's happening. Why have we fasted and it's like God hasn't seen us? Why have we afflicted our soul? Part of fasting is this sort of, for these guys anyway, is this sort of ritualized mourning kind of a thing. We've afflicted our souls in this ritualized mourning, and God hasn't seen us, it seems like. Well, why hasn't he done anything? Behold, in the day of your fast you find pleasure and exact all your labors. You do whatever you want on fast days. You serve your own interests and oppress all your workers. Exact all your labors is probably oppress all your workers. You do whatever you want on these fast days and you oppress all your workers. You really think that God's going to acknowledge you for this? As you fast for strife and debate. In other words, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to smite with the fist of wickedness, to beat people up. The fasts that you're having only cause divisions because, this person's doing it this way and this person's doing it slightly different way, and they're beating each other up about it. And if you think that's not right, go look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're still doing that hundreds of years later. They're really, really angry about very small details about observances of fasts and other things like that. And it says, "Ye shall not fast as ye do this day, to make your voice to be heard on high." It says, you guys are not supposed to be doing this. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. God is not going to listen to you when you fast like this. This is not how you influence God to help you, in case you were wondering. Is it such a fast that I've chosen? A day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush and spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Well, thou called this a fast and an acceptable day of the Lord? Now, this is a slightly surprising question. Because you're like, yeah? Isn't that what this is about? In the ancient Near East, that's what this was about. He says, is this such a fast that I've chosen? A day for man to afflict his soul, to do these kind of ritual punishment of themselves? And people will be like, yeah, that's the point. That's why we do this. To bow down his head as a bulrush? Yeah, you sort of like are bent over, you're humbling yourself, you lie on sackcloth and ashes. This is what we do. This is what we've always done. This is how you fast, right? So people are like, well, what are you talking about? Of course this is how you fast. But he says, really, you're going to call this a fast? You think this is acceptable to the Lord? And people are like, well, yeah, that's exactly what I think. What do you think? And he says, is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke? Well, maybe fasting should be a little bit more than just sitting on sackcloth and ashes. Maybe it should be about loosing the bonds of injustice, undoing the thongs of the yokes that are around people's necks as they're bringing loads back and forth. He's talking about laborers that are still working during these fast days, letting the oppressed go free and actually breaking these yokes so that people do not have to be burdened all the time as though they were slaves. Now, we get some references to this stuff in Ezra and Nehemiah, which is interesting. There's scattered references to Ezra and Nehemiah throughout here. Another reason that I think this is probably a little later. They're saying, guys, fasting should not just be about this. When you fast, now he's not saying this, but I think the implication is a connection that we have here with Islam. In Islam, when you fast, the reason you fast, part of the reason is so that you remember what it's like to be poor. So that when you go and you give to the poor, you remember what it's like to be hungry, like that poor person over there. So when you give to the poor, you give a little more, because you know what it's like to be hungry now, because you've fasted. And I think that is one important element of fasting we don't usually think about. But that seems to be where he's taking it here. Is, guys, just sitting in sackcloth and ashes doesn't do it. There are people that really are wearing sackcloth because that's all they have to wear. There are people that are hungry because they don't have food. They're not choosing to abstain. They just don't have food. this should be a reminder to you to go free people that are like this. In parts of Africa, the church had to clarify that skipping 2 meals did not mean not eating for multiple days, because there's some people that only eat eat a meal a day in Africa, and so some people, to skip 2 meals in a row, were actually not eating for 48 hours. And the church had to say, no, we made those directions with the West in mind. It just means 24 hours, But that's what we have to think about when we're fasting, is these people that fast because, not voluntarily, they fast because they don't have any food. And I think that's what he's saying here. Fasting should be about the poor. Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh. These people are, in some ways, sometimes not even taking care of their own children, hiding themselves from thine own flesh. They're not giving their food to the hungry. They're not taking care of the poor. They're not covering the naked. And so, is this really going to help you? Is this kind of fasting really going to help you? And I think that's part of why in both Islam and in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we actually have fast offering that's associated with fasting. And why do we give it when we're fasting? We give it when we're fasting because we remember what it's like to be hungry, and we're incentivized to give a little bit more. I know people that give a lot more than just the cost of the 2 meals, because it's inspiring you to give more than that, because you know what it's like to be hungry, and you remember what it's like to not have cover, not have shelter, to not have clothing. And you're incentivized to give more. Because of my own life experiences and some things that I and my ancestors have been through, I try to be pretty generous about things, because I know what it's like to go without. And that's what he's saying here. Fasting should remind us of this and cause us to be more generous. And then the promises for doing this are beautiful. The classic, beautiful treat of Isaiah. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine health shall spring forth speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee. The glory of the Lord shall be thy rearward. Then shalt thou call, and the Lord shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. If thou take away from the midst of thee the yoke, the putting forth of the finger and speaking vanity, if thou draw up thy soul to the hungry, and satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall thy light rise in obscurity, and thy darkness be as the noonday. And the Lord shall guide thee continually, and satisfy thy soul in drought, and make fat thy bones. Thou shalt be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters fail not. And they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thine own pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words, then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. It is interesting that pretty much exactly half of the chapter is talking about how they're not doing it right, and the other half of the chapter is what happens if you do it right. And it is these beautiful, beautiful promises of what will happen if we do this right. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning, like a new dawn over the earth. Thy health shall spring forth speedily. Thy righteousness shall, the quickly your health will be revived, in other words. And this is sort of interesting, because usually we think of fasting as something that is sort of against your health, but actually some fasting is good for you. But your health will spring forth speedily. Your righteousness shall go before thee, and the glory of the Lord shall be thy rearward. And you could actually say righteousness with a capital R. Your vindicator will go before you. The glory of your Lord shall be your rear guard. that God will protect you on either side as you go through life, because you are taking care of the poor. Then shalt thou call, and the Lord shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. When you take care of people, God will respond to you when you pray to him. If thou take away from the midst of thee the yoke, the putting forth of the finger, and speaking vanity, put away from you these yokes that you've put on these people, the putting forth of the finger. And this is a little bit odd, the putting forth of the finger, but it could also literally be like pointing the finger at people, right? Making fun of them. If you put away from the midst of you evil doings, pointing of the finger, and speaking vanity, or speaking evil or malicious things. If you draw out your soul to the hungry, or even offer your substance to the hungry, soul can sometimes be translated that way. If you offer your substance to the hungry and satisfy people, the appetite of those that are hungry, then will your light rise in obscurity. Your light will shine out of the darkness, and your darkness will become like new day light. This notion of the light rising up, this new day dawning for you because you have taken care of the poor. And the Lord shall guide thee continually and satisfy thy soul in drought. Or in other words, he will see to your needs in an arid land. He says, I know that you guys are in a dry place, but the Lord will guide thee continually, see to your needs continually, and make sure you get the rain you need. This is pretty serious. In a place like Israel, in the southern Levant, and the east coast of the Mediterranean there, if you don't have help like this, you're up a creek without a paddle. You need rain constantly. And he says, you want rain? I'll tell you how to get rain. Just take care of the poor. And it says he'll make your bones fat, or strengthen your bones, right? But the idea is the fatness of successful agriculture, that idea. This will be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters fail not. In this arid place, you will have so much water you will not know what to do with it if you take care of the poor. And I don't think that can be read metaphorically. I'm not sure it's meant to be read metaphorically. These guys are worried about this. The drought's a huge problem over there, and he's saying, you want to avoid drought? Take care of people, and I'll take care of you. And they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations. And thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. It says, those that come of you, your family members, your descendants, will build up these old waste places. If you take care of the poor, your descendants will build up the places that were destroyed by the Babylonians, and this place will be a nice inhabited place to live in. It is not at this point. At the time of the Persian period, there are some small scattered settlements. It has nothing like the population it used to have. But he says, you know what, you take care of people again, it'll look like it used to. We'll have people here again. He'll raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. People will look back, and generations later, people will look back to you and say, he started it. He's the one that started us to fix up these places that have been broken down, the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in, these lush areas that people could live in. People are going to look back and point to you as the one that started that. If you take care of the poor, God will bless you that this happens to you. If you turn away your foot from the Sabbath. In other words, don't travel more than you're supposed to from doing your pleasure on my holy day. Don't just do whatever you want to do on your holy day, on God's holy day. And call the Sabbath of the light, the holy of the Lord, honorable. And shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. It says, if you don't travel on the Sabbath, if you don't engage in business, it's funny that it says pleasure, but it should probably be something like business on my holy day. If you esteem this above all other days, the Sabbath, and you honor it, and don't do just what you want to do what God wants you to do, don't engage in idle talk, speaking thine own words is what that means, Then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord. You'll take delight in Yahweh, and He'll set you astride on the heights of the earth. Now, what is this? I think this is a promise that Jerusalem is going to be built up again. It was just this little tiny thing. It's on sort of these heights, right? It's on this ridge. I think he's saying God's going to have you to rise up. It says ride up, but the idea is rise up on the heights of the earth. The temple's going to be built again. Jerusalem's going to be built up again. And He'll feed you with the heritage of Jacob thy father. In other words, it's going to be like it was before, when Israel was well established there. For the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. That's God promising that that's going to happen. And when you think about this, you go, that's quite the promise for just taking care of the poor. But think about what has happened earlier. We've talked about this before. This happened under the Babylonians. This happened under the Assyrians. The people that do not get taken care of do not support the higher-ups in the government. And there's a lot of instability and a lot of problems. You want to have a successful society, you just have to take care of the poor, or the poor are going to take care of you. At least in the ancient world, that was how that went. And to a great extent, I think it can happen to us. It can happen to us. It happened as recently as 1789 in France. It happened as recently as the early 1900s in Russia. The poor were not taken care of, so the poor took care of everybody else. And I'm not going to say that that's not going to happen in the United States. We came close to that in the 1930s. Most people don't realize this. We came very close to that in the 1930s. So we need to take care of people. We have very good reasons for doing that on purely a national security level, but also just on a personal religious level. Isaiah is saying, really, you're going to fast and not take care of the poor and think that God's going to be cool with that? You really think that's okay? And of course the answer is no. But if we do these things, these blessings can come to us too. I don't think this is limited to just the limited time and place of Judah during the Persian period. I think this applies to all of us. Take care of the poor, we'll be surprised at the significant blessings that we get from God. We don't have to worry as much about drought. We don't have to worry about Jerusalem getting rebuilt. But we have lots of problems that could be solved if we took care of the poor. And I've had personal experiences with that, where I've had times when I was having a really rough time. I didn't have anybody in my life really that I could turn to, and when I started helping people, that gave me the peace of mind that I needed to move on with my life. And that's honestly the experience I have fits everything that Isaiah is saying here. So maybe when we are having a hard time, we should think about this. We fast for answers and for help, but maybe part of that is opening ourselves up to other people, and maybe in the course of doing that, that'll solve our problems. So anyway, that's it for today. We're going to be moving on to 59 next time. There's not as famous as 58, but there's some fun stuff in there, and we will see you guys next time.